Hello and welcome to the Bible study. My name is Kent Philpott. This is program number 15 in our series on the book of Revelation. We are in chapter 6. We're going to be looking at the first 8 verses in this program, and then the next one we're going to be looking at the last part of chapter 6, which will put us over 1/4 through this incredible book of Revelation. You remember that revelation means to reveal. It's not hidden. Sometimes the book Revelation, you think, well, we have to figure out what's going on. You know, it's a mystery, but the intent of the writer is to reveal to the readers what the whole scope of history looks like, from the creation to the end of it, to the day of judgment, to the second coming of the Messiah. And that's what the book of Revelation is talking about. It's talking about the beginning to all the way to the end. What happens in between times here on the planet, this, well, you might say very temporary, however many billions of years the universe has been around, it's really temporary. It's not going to last forever. Peter makes that clear, that the heavens and earth will be dissolved as with fire. And so this is this interim period, and it's the story of it. In the book of Revelation, as you've heard me say a number of times, tells the story 7 different times, 3 ways, 3 times in a more lengthy period of time. That has to do with the seals, which we're talking about now, and then with the trumpets, and then with the bowls, or sometimes translated vials, something poured out. So that's what it does. It tells the story over and over and over again. It's like sermons. It's been suspected that the Gospel of John is a series of sermons that have been stitched together and put together, and so we have the Gospel of John. The book of Revelation is quite similar to that. That's the view that I take. And by the way, if other people, and I've run again up against this a few times, if other people disagree with my point of view, I could very well be wrong. You want to say that any one individual's interpretation is the interpretation. That the book of Revelation has to be approached with a great deal of humility, and a great deal of the time we have to say, I don't really know what this means, but it may mean this. I think it means this. And I'm trying to do that. Some things that are fairly clear, that we understand from examination, but a lot of times that the best of scholars, the most biblically Jesus-centered scholars, will disagree on some major issues. But that doesn't mean anything. It's always been that way in the church. There's no 2 Christians who believe exactly alike. We're going to find those things, and some people are thrown by it, thinking that, it's so simple, that God is so easy to understand, and the history of humankind and of the world and all that goes with that is so simple, it's easy. Well, it's this, or this. No, it's not that simple. And especially when we have rather compromised minds that we bring to the table, and who will not admit that is not so. It is so. We aren't as capable as we think we are. We have a higher assessment of ourselves. We think higher of ourselves than we ought to think. And so we do have to approach, especially a book like Revelation, where we have some ways of trying to figure out what this is based on other apocalyptic kind of literature, but always we have in front of us that we may not have it exactly. And again, it's good to have conversation and debate about some of this material. That is always healthy for Christians to begin to do. The visions that God gives John, sometimes it's been said, a vision is worth 1,000 words. But once you see a vision of God, how do you really write it down to be understood? Anyway, we do the best we can, but at least we gain an idea of some of the material that's in the book of Revelation. So now, the seven seals, chapter 6, beginning at verse 1. Now, the last two chapters, 4 and 5, have focused on worship. In chapter 4, we have the worship of God, the triune God. And then in chapter 5, we have a more specific worship of the Lamb who was slain, or God the Son, who is worthy because that he has conquered death and hell. He is worthy to open the seals. The scroll had seals on it, probably wax seals, and they were legal. The scroll was in like a legal document to be opened at the event of someone's death. And the witnesses who had seals was on the scroll. One by one, they would open it. That meant that the scroll had not been tampered with. It was clean and good and legal. So that's what's going to be taking place. Now, I watched when the Lamb opened one of the seven seals, and I heard one of the four living creatures say with a loud voice, let me see, what was the first living creature? Let me see, I have to go back in my notes. The first living creature, I can't remember. Let's see, the first living creature, can't find it right at this particular moment, but it's one of them. They open it, one of the living creatures, and say with a voice like thunder. When you see that, it's always, the voice of God, the strength of God. Come, or some people translate as go on, go now, be going. Instead of come, but be going. Talking to a rider on a horse and wants the rider to ride, okay? And I look and behold a white horse. Okay, we have a white horse. Now, here's where we run into problems. Who is represented by the rider and the white horse? It says, and its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him. He came out conquering and to conquer. One of my favorite commentators is a man by the name of Hendrickson, William Hendrickson, and he says that this is Jesus. And then another writer, Kistemaker, Simon Kistemaker, who probably is my favorite on the book of Revelation, says that this is representative of the gospel itself, the gospel, the good news of Christ, who Jesus is and what Jesus did on the cross. Others say that it's the Antichrist. Wow. I mean, this is really, really spread very far apart, isn't it? I mean, there's really tremendous amount of differences here. So let's go back and look at it. I looked, and behold, a white horse, and its rider had a bow. Now, a bow and arrow. That was this was like an armored tank. This was a war horse here. We think about the Parthians, the enemies that existed in the area of Iraq and Afghanistan, who in that era the Romans never conquered. And they were expert horse people, and they developed the bow and arrow, much like the Comanche did in American history. They had it down. They were expert with the bow, and they had horses, and they were fast, and they were deadly, accurate, and brutal, and greatly to be feared, and the Romans never conquered them. The Parthians. Some people say, well, that's what it is. It's the enemies of the church. A bow and a crown was given to him. Now, here's the interesting thing. A crown was given. They didn't, they were given. Who gave it? How did they earn it? The best idea, I think, is that somehow that in God's way of doing things, God permitted this kind of destruction to begin to take place. It's very difficult to totally understand it. But a writer had a bow. Now, in Revelation 19:11, we have a passage where Jesus is on a white horse. And that's, of course, where William Hendrickson gets the idea that this is referring to Jesus. But I don't know. I think it may be a representation of the Antichrist. Now, we have other material in the Scripture that I may try to take a little bit of a look at here. I've got a couple passages. One here in Matthew chapter 10, verse 34. Let me read this to you and see what you think. Do not think that I have come to bring peace on the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a person's enemies will be those of his own household. And we have that, and also in 24, we have Jesus saying, so when you see the abomination of desolation, that in other words, the Antichrist, spoken of by the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, let the one who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house, and let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas for women who are pregnant in those days. Pray that your flight may not be in the winter. Anyway, so we have this event take place. We have this kind of destruction that comes upon the earth. So how do you interpret that? How do you interpret this white horse who was given a bow and a crown, in other words, becomes kind of a powerful conqueror? And this takes place during the age of the church. This is something that the church is going to have to face. Okay, so the white horse. We don't exactly know who it is. Now let's go on to the next verse. When he opened the second seal, now we have the second seal opened, I heard the second living creature say, come. And out came another horse. Out from where? We're not told. It's a picture that he sees. The only words he describes in his vision, all of a sudden, here comes another horse, bright red. The bright red horse. Now, this is a very interesting thing. The word red could also be translated fiery, but it had the blood red kind of color. And I think pretty much most people are in agreement that now we see the presence of Satan's counterattack. This writer was permitted. The writer was permitted to take peace from the earth. Now, remember, Jesus said, I've not come to bring peace but a sword upon the earth. Some people could still interpret this as still being Jesus, but I doubt it. It looks to me like this is the issue of the counterattack of the Antichrist, or Satan's counterattack. Remember the key verse that controls all of our history, and that is Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. I'm going to read it because we haven't looked at it for a little while. But here is the verse in the earliest strata of the biblical material. Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Now, I'm going to spend just a moment interpreting this. God says to the serpent, who is Satan, I'm going to put enmity. There's going to be a battle. And here's again the big why question. How in the world is this going on? But this is what we find. There's going to be a battle. There's going to be a constant war that exists between the offspring of the woman, which is going to be Jesus, and the offspring of Satan, which are the demons. And there's going to be the battle. And the demonic will bruise only the heel of the offspring of the woman, but the offspring of the woman will bruise the serpent's head. In other words, deliver a death blow. And that is essentially the story of the Bible. It is essentially the story of the book of Revelation. This is what John is repeatedly saying. And it's really just commentary on Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. You know, the Bible is so interesting. It starts with Genesis. And you see in the first 3 chapters the whole history of humankind. And you see then in the book of Revelation, it's said again and again and again. And finally, the end of Revelation, it wraps it all up. And we have the bruising of the head of Satan. That's it. You just might as well quit now. I mean, you got the whole story. We're just looking at some of the finer points. So this is the story we have. So we have the bright red or the fiery red horse. Right, it was permitted. In other words, God is sovereign. He permits this. Again, the why question, we don't have an answer for it. To take peace from the earth. The history of our world has been war. And you think in this era, 2014, 2015, you wonder how it could get any worse. It's been many times, and human beings have wondered that very same thing. It is not much different. There have been a few times in the history where we haven't had this scale of warfare, but sometimes there's been a lot more than this. It's either was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that men should slay one another, and he was given a great sword. So here's the second rider on the red horse, and we now have global war. Verse 5. And the third seal. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a black horse. A black horse. Now, the black horse. The black horse is a figure of death. It's a figure of warfare. And it is another picture, another image of devastation. And its rider had a pair of scales in his hands. Now, you understand a pair of scales. A pair of scales, that's an interesting term, where there are two like this. You'd imagine one scale, you have both sides, but here, a pair of scales. So John sees this image. A black horse, its rider had a pair of scales, and I heard what seemed to be the voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and wine." Now, this takes a little work. Now, obviously, we're going to have a situation where food is going to be scarce. When you have the kind of devastation that war brings on any location, you're going to have the trouble with famine. Now, in our own day, it is not as severe because we're able to meet the needs of people who are undergoing tragic consequences when war has erupted in their countries. And it's done still poorly, ineffectually in many ways, but there is some rescue. There are many organizations that exist to bring relief. And so we've gotten to that point. But historically, when war was present, famine would follow. But it's not a complete famine. It looks as though, and the commentators are pretty much agreed on this, that it is not a total famine, but it presents that food is scarce because food is still available. A quart of wheat for a denarius A denarius was what it meant to the readers of that time was the money an individual worked for working one day. It was enough to take care of the needs of the family. So here we have the wheat, a quart of wheat, maybe make you a good loaf of bread, but that's all it's going to do. And that's a lot of money to spend on a loaf of bread, okay? 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. Now, you get 3 quarts of barley because barley wasn't as good. It was gluten-free. It was the first real grain in that part of the world that came up. And it came up several months before the wheat harvest was brought in. So it depicts scarce times, not a complete famine, but times are difficult, going to be hard. The food isn't going to be very, very plentiful. But then it says, do not harm oil and wine. Oh, let me say that that the prices were from 8 to 10 times higher than normal. One commentator said that the prices were 11 to 16 times higher. I tend to go with the 8 to 10 times higher. But oil and wine, no change. So it looks like that the wealthy people are still able to buy the luxuries. And oil and wine would have been the luxuries. The oil to heat and to light, and the wine was what you drank. And so this is what some people think, that it's a limited famine, not a complete famine. Okay, we don't exactly know the fullness of this, but for some reason, but it is not a complete famine. Verse 7. Then he opened the 4th seal. I heard the voice of the 4th living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse. Now, I'm a fan of Clint Eastwood, and I loved his movie, Pale Rider. And it's taken from this. This is sometimes called the 4 horses of the apocalypse, or the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And here we have a pale horse. Actually, the word pale would more likely be rendered greenish. It had a green, kind of a sickly color to it. And look, to behold, a pale horse. And the idea here is pestilence or disease. And there's kind of a natural progression. You have warfare, you have food that is scarce, and then you have disease and pestilence. You have illness, and this is what it looks like that is taking place. The pale horse, sickly in appearance, greenish. And the Hebrew would be pestilence, and the Greek, it would be death. Now, this is the only horse among the 4 that is actually given a name. And it was given, notice, and they were given authority over 1/4 of the earth to kill with sword and with famine and with pestilence by wild beasts of the earth. Well, we have an interesting picture here. And there would be many instances in the history of the people living on the planet where they would say, yes, this is exactly what takes place. And now you have a large die-off, a large dying of people. And so you have the death occurring, the deaths occurring due to all of these things. There's a verse I want to read, John 16:33, that I think goes along with this, if I can find it here. He says, I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Now that is almost a summary statement of the entire book of Revelation. Jesus said, in the world you will have tribulation. Christianity, sometimes people think, promises health, wealth, and prosperity. That if you just live right and do right and believe right, everything was going to be fine for you. If you think positively and you have the right amount of faith, and if you just go about your life this way, that everything you're going to prosper, everything is going to be just wonderful. Well, the Scripture does not present life like that. Jesus said, in the world you will have tribulation. He said that to his apostles 2,000 years ago, and nothing has changed. That verse, John 16:33, continues throughout. It is one of the main themes of the book of Revelation. We've just read it here. We're going to read it a number of more times. We can't get away from it. We say that I hear that sometimes in other countries and other regions of the world, Christianity is growing by leaps and bounds because of the promise of prosperity and health and wealth. That if you follow the program, if you believe strongly enough, then these good things will come to you. Well, I believe that fundamentally is dishonest and not right. Because Jesus told us in the Gospels, we find it here repeatedly in the book of Revelation, that things are not going to be that way. That there will come a time, and there are those times that come right now for some people. There are more people being martyred for Christ right now than ever before. The figures are that right now, and I'm talking about December 2014, that between 150,000 and 250,000 Christians are martyred every year. Every year. If you pick the low number, 150,000, well, that's a lot of people. It has never been so large except at this period in history. And you can see that it happens. We have the warfare. We have the famine, the scarce food. We have the illness, the disease. And it results in death and misery. And the Bible uses the word tribulation. We might know the word persecution. It is the battle of the Antichrist and Christ. This is the biblical view of the history of the world. It may shock some, but it is one way of looking at what we experience in our world. So long.